This week on Buffer, and we're talking about what's new with Apple at WWDC. And we're also going to be talking about the recent SpaceX IPO, the largest in human history. And Gabe, I think these are fantastic topics. You know, I always like to talk about what's new at WW. And then, of course, with companies like Starlink specifically, we have to talk about that $75 billion raise, that $1.7 trillion valuation, and also just how the first 20 pages of their S1 was just pictures. The marketer in me loves that. I was scrolling through that and I was like, dang, this is pretty cool. But then you look at any other S1 and it's just like paragraphs on paragraphs. So I think we have to talk about what all this means and what cool actually means in the tech space and why this matters. I think it matters so much more than many of our broadband and communication service providers think. So let's talk a little bit more today about Apple and WW, Starlink IPO, and just some of the conversations we've had recently with customers on this same question of how do we make what we do feel cool?
Feel cool. Yes, it's such a subjective term. Definitely excited to get into this conversation today, Zach. And yes, the Starlink S1 just cracked me up. I mean, I obviously don't read through a ton of S1s, but I've definitely looked at a few over the years. And that one was definitely one of the most unique ones I've ever seen, because you're right. The first, two dozen pages were just nothing but pictures of space, which, I mean, to be fair, really cool pictures of space. So, they had that going for them, but they've definitely put on a masterclass in marketing around how to build enthusiasm for a going public event. So they've done a really good job there.
And we'll talk about this more here in the SpaceX segment, if you will, Gabe. But I just remember going to that report thinking I need to learn a little bit more about this, and then seeing these pictures, and I totally got distracted and forgot why I was even there to begin with. But before we go too deep down that path, we have to talk about Apple. And I know like the Android folks listening right now are a little upset, but hey, I talked about Google I/O a couple weeks ago. So we had that moment.
We're equal opportunity here on Buffering.
By the way, I always tell people there's no bad flagship phone. Like it's all good. Like the OSs are perfect. Now, 10, 15 years ago, I think that would have been a different story, but there's no wrong answer here. That being said, let's talk about WW here. And for the second or third year in a row now, Apple has completely rebuilt Siri. They also launched Siri AI, which it's interesting because it's theoretically powered by Gemini under the hood. Now, Apple, they don't talk about the specific models, of course. They're not going to invite their competition into that conversation, as you know. But from an underlying perspective, these Apple Foundation models are powered by some of these Gemini models, purpose-built, private cloud compute, all that with Apple. And I don't want to get into the tech specs of that too much, but Gabe, I also have to just mention here, this was Tim Cook's final WWDC as the CEO of Apple. So he's stepping down in September. John's taking over.
You're taking over on September 2nd, right? He steps down September 1st, and then you're just right in.
Yeah, I'm taking over September 2nd. I'm going to shut Siri down after it's brand new. And I'm also probably going to end. Actually, I don't even have to say this because there's been rumors that John, their upcoming CEO, has secretly ended the Vision Pro
really?
Project for the time being. Whether or not that's accurate or not, that would be my move too. But all of this to say, as we talk about AI, privacy is really Apple's brand. We've talked about the trust and privacy that Apple's developed and built their company around here in the past. And with AI, it kind of changes the conversation a little bit. So another one of my favorite Apple executives, Craig Federighi, guy's got great hair, by the way.
Great hair. Yeah, for sure. We should all be so lucky.
There was a demo once, and it was in Game Center, rest in peace, that app, but it was in Game Center, and his username was HairForce1, and I thought that was hilarious.
That's amazing. That is a really good name.
That's, $1 trillion marketing for you. But,
yeah, seriously.
He mentioned that AI, with privacy in AI is a non-negotiable. So they're sticking to this, but they're also introducing these new capabilities here. I, of course, have been testing iOS 27 on one of my devices here because I do have, apps that need this, also because I just love the hype. So I had some thoughts there as well. But Gabe, I think we have to talk about Siri AI to kick things off here, because what Apple announced with Siri AI is a little bit different than what they said in the past. So in the past, they announced the features and everything they wanted to do. Great. But now they have a dedicated Siri AI app. And I tested that. I asked, what are the best things to do in my town in the summertime. I did some general, queries around like, tell me about this or tell me who this is, things like that. But I found myself asking Siri questions that I've historically gone to Google for, I've historically gone to Gemini for. And it brought up the question of, I don't want to say this is one of those, last mover advantages or first mover advantages situations, but when you think about Apple, what do they need to do to get people who are already using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini to switch to this Siri version? We're talking about a product that's been pretty beaten up, to begin with, but we're also talking about people have been using ChatGPT for, I don't know, 4 years now. They've been using Claude for several years. How do you get people to move into these new tools? And do you think Apple's done enough to build hype around that?
I think the answer to that is no on the has Apple built up enough hype around it. We shall see. The fact that they still called it Siri and just slapped AI at the end of it, I think is kind of hilarious because Zach, I mean, you've talked for years now on the podcast about how much you dislike Siri just in
Two
general.
minutes ago.
Yeah, exactly. So it's surprising to see them keep that name, to bundle in AI onto that, and then also to move it away from some of the deep integration that we've seen previously to, like you said, kind of its own app. So, time will tell, obviously. We'll see what happens. I remember I'm old enough to remember talking about Apple Intelligence on this podcast, a while back as well, Zach. That's another,
There was so much
and the,
excitement around
oh
that.
my gosh, so much. But it just went nowhere because fundamentally the product wasn't very good. But, and hopefully this is what they've built now is a better version of that. But going back to your question about what would compel somebody to switch, when the switching costs in this case are pretty low, especially for, basic search, right? Like if you're not, if you're building things in, Claude or OpenAI and things like that, obviously there's going to be cost associated with it. But when we're talking about just general search of what should I do in my town over the summer, that's effectively free or is free. So the cost of switching is low, but is it cool? Is it cool like ChatGPT and like Gemini and like Claude are now? And I think the answer to that is no. It's not. It doesn't have the same cachet as those other brand names do.
Do you think part of it, Gabe, is a branding problem of like us knowing that this thing flopped over the last 2 years? Do you think that's going to be difficult for Apple to overcome? How useful, how great this new Siri AI tool is aside.
100%. And you even, you saw it when, as this stuff was coming out this week, is people are still calling back to a lot of the Apple Intelligence ads or Apple Intelligence videos that were posted at the dub, as you would call it, a couple of years ago when this was launched, and kind of dragging Apple a little bit for, hey, you said this thing was available 2 years ago. Well, now it actually is doing the things that you said it was going to do at that point. So yeah, I absolutely think it's a branding problem and a problem that is going to be difficult for them to fight back from, because there is a negative connotation around Apple Intelligence. And I mean, using my air quotes there on purpose.
And I think they moved away from Apple Intelligence and went back to Siri AI very intentionally. But the
Mm-hmm.
reason we bring this up, the reason we talk about this is over the past few years, we've used, I mean, I feel like every AI tool that's out there. We all started with ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. These are all tools that at one point I was like, this is the best one ever. And it's constantly evolves. So I think where Apple's going to win in this space is just the integration and the capabilities they have. And one of the
Yes.
ones that comes to mind is just this week. So Apple releases all this new software. I go right into my Xcode beta as soon as that came out, and I swapped out a Gemini model for the Apple's new Foundation model. And I told you like the feedback I had, it wasn't terrible. It was querying my same Google Cloud database. I did a split test between Gemini and the Apple Foundation model. And I did feel like I had a little bit less control over the Apple response. It was kind of comically very formal. So like it would be like, I'm pleased to introduce you to, and that's how it would start every response. And I was like, okay, let's just not do that. Versus Gemini, which gave me a more direct, approach to my app, which said, you met Gabe here. This is the context behind your connection with Gabe. So it was pretty interesting just to see these models side by side. Yeah, I'm not saying it was bad. It was unique, if anything. And again, this has been out for less than a week for Apple developers. Gabe, I don't know if you've had your hands on this yet too with some of the app work you've been doing, but
I have
I'm
not. I relied
excited,
on
but I'm
you.
not
I relied on you
impressed.
to go do the testing for me, which I really graciously appreciate you doing and testing my app to make
The
sure that
first
it
thing I
worked
did
on
was go to
iOS
Gabe's.
27.
Yeah, the first thing I did was I went to my app, of course, and just ran through it, and then I immediately went to Gabe's Crema app and just kind of I like just like spam clicked everything, and it was good, Gabe. I'm
And
pretty
then texted
impressed.
me and went, "Yeah, it looks good." So
Yeah,
yeah, you
that's
seem like you're fine.
that's the debugging level we're at, but
Well,
no,
so
I
let me ask you, Zach,
yeah.
to be honest, is there anything that Apple showed you when you tested this in Xcode that would make you stop using the Gemini tools that you're using now? And was there enough benefit from an integration perspective or anything that would get you off of the tools that you're currently using?
And this is where I see Apple winning is just the integration within their existing ecosystem. So one of the cool things, Gabe, I was texting some friends, and we have a couple weddings coming up here. Not me, but we were texting about this. In for the first time in iMessage, like it noted, it said add to calendar, add to notes. There's these options, so it's contextually aware within Apple's own apps. But then what it also does within the Siri AI app or the Siri app is it can bring it in there and then it can act on it too. So it's doing a lot of what Apple promised 2 years ago, and we're seeing it work for the first time. And I used to say like Siri's good for setting timers and that's about it. Can't even send a text message, which just drives me crazy in my car for the next few weeks. But it it's I just don't know. I still find myself going back to Gemini, but I think as we see developers pick up these integrations and do some exciting things as they always do, we'll see how it's implemented, how it interacts, and maybe that will change the perception. But right now, I told you before the podcast, I use Gemini to, similar to Google, to go out and find information, to learn things, look up something quickly. I use Claude to build. I use ChatGPT more for natural language marketing, headlines, things like that. So Siri AI, it's good in my device so far, but it's going to take a lot more to wow me. And this is what WWDC is about. Developers now have access to this. They're going to do exactly what I did and put these Apple Foundation models in their app, test it out.
Mhm,
And who knows? I even thought about in my app, do I give users the ability to pick between the models? I can see myself doing that. But like I said, I want the most control over the data. And of course, using Google Cloud, my data is already tightly integrated there. So
for sure.
we'll see. But I think Apple's ecosystem, and we talk about this often too, Apple's ecosystem across all of their products and software is going to be pivotal in this Siri AI, Apple AI environment.
Yeah, totally fair. Well, let's shift gears a little bit here, Zach, and continue to talk about quote unquote cool technology. So I want to talk about what makes a technology product feel cool. And this came directly from a customer conversation I was having this week where the idea of Starlink is cool and fiber is not cool. And how do we make fiber cool again? And I think you and I would argue that maybe fiber never was cool, but there is definitely I don't even know what the right word is, but it's a there is a buzz around Starlink for sure, and this gets to the SpaceX conversation that we want to have as well. But I'm curious to hear your perspective on what is it that you think makes a technology product feel cool?
Gabe, and I think I have to go back to like, some conversations we had with John Pico, but I think there's a big customer experience angle when it comes to what makes technology feel cool.
Mm.
Um, we talked about this yesterday. Satellite internet's never been cool. Wild Blue, Terry Young and I just talked about Wild. What happened to Wild Blue? We just talked about that this week. What happened to this company?
Uh,
Viasat, HughesNet. These aren't cool names. Number one, they don't have
no,
cool products. When I think of these companies, you know what I think of, Gabe? I think of that giant gray satellite dish mounted on the side of your house. And I think that ties back into the experience too. It ties back into the P's of marketing, product placement. It ties back into all this. But this has never been cool technology. But what has been cool is the brand, the narrative, the buyer experience, and that cultural moment. Gabe, we work with some customers that do a very good job in some of these areas as well, and it shows. But at the end of the day, here, going back to Starlink's website, a few weeks ago, I mean, they kind of do split testing, of course, as you should. And a few weeks ago, they had a single page website, and it was just enter your address, buy. It was one page, but like two button clicks kind of thing. And I think whether or not the technology is revolutionary in that moment, when the experience feels that way and when it feels modern, effortless, and clean, that's what people respond to. I think we could take this back to Apple, right? Some of the technology behind their products might not always be cool, but think of the experience of buying an iPhone, of buying a HomePod, buying a Mac, buying a Magic Mouse, and then hopefully returning it. But that experience down to the email touch points you get before you even get your product. I'm
The
assuming you're buying
onboarding
online here.
process, Zach. I mean,
The
how
onboarding
good?
process, the unboxing,
So
Gabe,
good.
all of
Yep.
this is critical. I think Apple does the best unboxing experience out of
They
out of any
literally
company.
patented it, and I completely forgot about that until this whole conversation that's come up over the last few weeks on the new Ferrari, the new electric Ferrari, which,
Mhm.
we don't need to get into that debacle. But the one thing that was really interesting was them thinking about the onboarding experience and the tactile way you would get into Ferrari, the key that they're using and how you actually start the car and all of those sorts of things. And, you know, again, regardless of whether you like the car or don't like the car, it's hideous. But the reality is they put a lot of thought into that onboarding experience, just like they did with Apple products when Joni Ive, right, was the person who was doing all of this, and it's again, they patented that unboxing experience because they knew that onboarding is part of what made that product feel cool and
Yeah.
feel like something different than you would have purchased before.
And I don't wanna go down this path too far, but there's two things I wanna mention here. Number one, um, when it comes to, like, the unboxing experience, we'll talk about this later on the podcast. I'm a fiber internet subscriber, but I'm also a Starlink subscriber. We'll talk about that in the future. There's gasp. I can hear the gasp coming in
I
already,
know,
Gabe.
yeah. People are like, wait,
But
what?
yeah, don't take that out of context. We're gonna circle back to that. But Gabe, when I sent you like the image of unboxing that Starlink, that it was an experience by itself. The instructions being printed on that box, the package, the way everything's laid out. Now it's not like on the level of Apple, but it's something that if you just ship a standard, box and hope for the best, that's just not a good experience. Now the other part of this, and this is an episode I want to do in the future, so I'm not going to like dive into this deep at all, but we have to just mention Rivian once. But their chief software officer um, posted a thing on Twitter, I believe it was, or posted on X, and it was the user experience of onboarding in a car. And Gabe, I sent you a text yesterday. I said this is not something you typically think of when you buy a car. Is what that onboarding experience is like. I remember like when I got my Toyota, it was like, yeah, connect it to the app and like that's it. Like the app doesn't even do anything, unlocks your doors at best. But what Rivian has done here, and I'll have to find this tweet and share it, but, they've really thought about that software, what it looks like to set up your car. Now, if you think about buying a new car, yeah, you might connect it to the app and call it good, but what is the rest of that experience? What does the rest of that journey looks like? I think they've done a great job. So, topic for another
Agreed.
day here, Gabe, but, I really think all of this ties back into that customer experience.
Hmm. And that combination of product, narrative, and marketing buzz that has to happen in order to make a product feel cool. And fiber had, I think, that for maybe a little while. It certainly has the product piece. We've talked about this ad nauseum before, but there's no one that's going to argue that fiber is not a better product than satellite internet. But it doesn't have the narrative anymore, and it doesn't have the buzz that exists with something like Starlink. And we're going to talk here in a moment about the Starlink IPO and obviously how that's beneficial for this conversation also. But this is something that providers, I think, need to think really deeply about, and what are those things that they can do. And Zach, I'd be curious if you had to tell a BSP marketing leader, how obviously we're not going to make fiber cool, quote unquote, right? Because it's not about the technology, but what is the first thing that you would tell them to fix? Is it website? Is it really trying to lean in on brand? Is it the way that they
Do I
talk
have
about
to
what they
pick just
sell?
one thing, Gabe?
You could say them
Because
all. That's
what
fine.
the reality is, everything we just talked about, Gabe, it's nothing more than the 7 Ps of marketing. It's your marketing
Mm,
mix. It's the product, it's the price, the place, the promotion, people, process, and then that physical evidence too. All of this comes in together. And in the past, I know like I know like the 4 Ps of marketing, like back in my day, back in high school, it was 4, then we added 3. The 3 I think that were added were people, process, and that physical evidence. I could be wrong, but there's 3 more now. There's 7. But all this goes back to the delivery method, and the customer experience, the
Mm,
employees who represent and interact with customers, the any tangible cues, branding, store layouts, another good example here, totally off topic, walking into a hotel lobby. You know exactly how that hotel stay is going to be when you walk into that lobby.
it's a
And
great
I think it
point.
just goes back to when you walk into the website, when you walk into a retail store, all this ties together. So we'll do an episode in the future on the 7 P's of marketing here because everything we just talked about, that's the foundation of how you make fiber cool. And like I said, you're not going to make fiber cool, but we're seeing satellite become cool. So how do we make our experience built on this fiber technology cool? And that's what we're here to talk about.
Well, I have a great idea for this. Everybody should go out immediately and file to become a public company and create a really cool S1 with very, very cool looking pictures over the first 20 pages of that. You know what's funny, Zach, is I was thinking about the pictures. And obviously, I'm being facetious here, but I was thinking about the pictures and the how cool those pictures are in the Starlink S1. And it's our customers or fiber customers, fiber providers often use pictures in their marketing too. You
I
know,
love
that
pictures in marketing. As you
I
should.
do too. However, is a is a ditch witch, putting fiber in the ground or a boring machine that's digging a hole in the ground for you to put conduit and fiber in, is that something that's actually going to get people interested in what it is that you're selling?
There's a time and a place, and this is what I tell people, and you can disagree with me. Would I lead my marketing with that? No. But like when my fiber provider came to town, everyone was like, well, are they going to dig through my lawn? Are they going to tear up my
Mm.
property? Like, how are they going to do this? And that's when they built a construction page that goes through this. Now, in that case, that's a very specific case of, hey, we're not going to tear up your lawn. Like, here's how it works. That's a totally different conversation. But if your marketing leads with, the ditch witch going through rock, I have seen people talk about like their ditch witch and like how it can tear through specific soil and rock. I'm like, okay, we're kind of deviating far from the marketing message here, but there's a time and a place, and your primary website or your homepage is probably not the place.
Yeah, I think
I
that's
will,
well said.
but I will say like photos. We're obviously not launching rockets. We're not building data centers in space. But what are you doing? What are you actually doing as a broadband or a communication service provider? Take pictures of that. Maybe it's not construction, but you don't have to file an S1. If you need help filing your S1, I'll drop Gabe's email in the chat here. But that's a
I
little
have
out
been
of my
involved in
expertise.
filing an S1, but yeah, definitely not my area of
Well, I
expertise
mean, to your point though, Gabe,
either.
like just the design, the aesthetics. You know me, even when it comes to like quarterly earnings and filings like that. I'm a huge believer in like this needs to look nice. We have to customize it. You can't just put a Word document up, and a lot of companies do that. I think it was Tesla actually, ironically, who was totally just like
Oh,
screenshotting
a
like the Excel
100% using
graphs. It was the
Excel
same
charts.
like default colors, and I'm like, that's pretty
Yes.
funny.
It
But
was hilarious. I don't know why I made that. That made me laugh so hard when I just realized that they were just using the full-on default Microsoft Excel colors for all of their charts and graphs.
I wonder if Apple uses numbers for their. You're gonna have to look that up. Actually,
The
I don't know if
only
Apple.
company in the world using
Well,
numbers.
no, because I don't think Apple does visuals like that. It's probably because they do use numbers. But that being said, let's talk more about the Starlink IPO
Uh,
here. So,
yes. Yeah, let's chat about it.
kick
So,
us off here, Gabe.
yeah, so I mean, I guess by the time people listen to this, we're actually recording on the day, Zach, that they've officially gone public. It's the largest IPO in history, $75 billion raised at call it just a $1.8 trillion valuation. It's an enormous organization now. They're the seventh most valuable U.S. company, and they're actually ahead of Tesla. And I think the other thing that was really interesting looking at the S1 and kind of seeing some of the financial details, they've got over 10 million customers now across 160 something countries. They've got nearly 10,000 satellites in space. They also talked a lot about the future satellites that they're going to be launching that are going to result in even lower latency, better speeds, all of those sorts of things. Well, they just got $75 billion to go do all of those things. So now they have this massive amount of cash to do lots of different things, obviously continue firing, rockets into space. But one of the things that I think they've done a really good job of is, ironically, Tesla kind of sits on its own, kind of over here, but the other Elon properties, and I'm not going to get into whether I think Elon's a good person or not. That's neither here nor there. But the thing that he's done that I think is really interesting and that his companies have done is they are very vertically integrated, right? So they're firing rockets into space to send things to the International Space Station. And then they're like, well, why don't we send some satellites up there too so we can provide internet at the same time? And they've figured out ways to reuse rockets. I don't know if you noticed, did you pull up, have you been on X at all today?
No, I haven't today.
Okay. I was, scrolling through X while I was brushing my teeth this morning, and there were a couple of interesting things. There's a big banner right across the top of the feed that talks about the SpaceX IPO and links to a bunch of videos and things like that. And then they actually changed the heart, so like the like emoji or the like button, I should say, on tweets. I'm still calling them. It's still okay to call them tweets, right? But they changed it to a rocket. So it's a rocket instead of the heart. So it's like these little things where they're thinking about how do they use all of these different businesses that they have to ultimately drive forward the entire organization. It's a really
Gabe,
smart, well thought out strategy.
and I don't know if you knew this, but on their rockets they have these grid fins, and powering said grid fins is actually the motor that Tesla uses in their cars.
Is it really? Oh, that's so funny.
You
I
have
did
to do
not know
some
that.
research on this. Now, why are we even talking about this? So we talked about the first 20 pages of the S1 here, but I just love brand books to begin with. But one of the things they called out, which is kind of a red flag for communication service providers listening to this podcast, is their addressable market, and they quite explicitly said this, is the entire planet. Every single one of your subscribers is in their addressable market. Gabe and I are in their addressable market. Everyone is in their addressable market. And they were pretty clear, Gabe, in saying that.
They were very clear in saying that. And yeah, they're coming for it all. And again, we can make arguments as to whether that's a reasonable thing to say. I know a lot of people push back significantly against that, to be like, that's a ridiculous addressable market. And, again, I'm not going to argue that here, but the point is they're coming for everything. And they're being really thoughtful about how they're changing the technology over time to be able to offer a very, very differentiated experience to subscribers. And it would make me nervous if I was, a broadband service provider, trying to compete with them, because they have the cool factor. They have a whole pile of cash that they just got. And, not to be all doomsday about this, we want to talk about potential solutions, but, it's so important now for broadband service providers to think deeply about the customer experience that they're delivering and to make sure that they're building a proper experience for their customers so that they don't even consider another alternative. And if all of the communication that you have with your customer right now is the monthly bill, that is a very, very dangerous place to be in.
It's a terrible touch point to begin with. But Gabe, I'll be honest, I wouldn't look at my bill if I wasn't reimbursed for it. So like
Yeah,
again, it goes
exactly.
back to what is your touch point. Now, I think the other part of this conversation too is just thinking about who their addressable market is. Gabe, we've talked about cities like Chicago, cities like Denver, all these
Sure.
large cities. I even saw a Reddit post today of someone in Los Angeles with Starlink.
Mm.
So there's all these people in these areas where
I mean,
historically it's been Starlink's not built for this market. But
correct.
I still think the question is, well, Starlink may not be coming for Xfinity or some of these big players, but they're still coming for your customers.
Mm-hmm. I don't live in a thriving metropolis. I'm not in, San Francisco or LA or anything like that. So, but I see Starlink satellites on homes around, and there's a fiber provider here and there's a cable provider here. So there are two viable options for internet, and people are still choosing to go with Starlink instead of those things. So it's a concern. And Zach, I think we have to take the opportunity to circle back to the conversation that you brought up earlier, which is, you're a Starlink subscriber? We need to tell people more about this.
Yeah, so we have to talk about me being a Starlink subscriber, and if this gets me into trouble, my name is Gabe Peterson. No, I live in a remote area. I spend a lot of time, deep into the mountains where you'll be hours from cell signal, or on road trips, it's far in between towns where you have cell signal. It's not reliable. So I, of course, being in the industry, I have fiber in my apartment here. Very happy with my provider as well. I recommend them to all my friends and neighbors as well. So it's not like I'm, anti fiber. But the reality is, I had this unique problem, and my solution was, well, I'm going to try it out. I'm going to try to put a Starlink Mini mounted on my car and see how it works. And I think it's been 2 weeks now, Gabe, 3 weeks now, and it has been a phenomenal experience. I cannot talk about how great it's been. I have had more points from Starlink in the past 2 or 3 weeks than I've had with my BSP for the past 4 or 5 years. That's the reality of it. I've gotten a bill from my fiber BSP every month, as you mentioned, Gabe, but they've never once had any other contact with me other than the time I moved. Whereas Starlink, from the onboarding experience, to the automated welcome emails, to the how to get started, how to make the most out of my setup, it's been fantastic. But the problem we have now, Gabe, and this is the reason I bring it up, because I've heard this conversation more than once this week from CSPs we work with, is I'm a fiber subscriber. I have Starlink in my car, but I just gave Starlink, a welcome into my home. They've got their foot in the door of my apartment. And it's only a matter of time now between, when either myself or someone else in the situation has that thought of, well, why do I have both? Why don't I just have Starlink? I talked about this rural remote customer too, who repeated this same thing. They have communities with cabins or their vehicles. They're very far north that they just don't have cell service like you would in a big town. So their subscribers are going out and doing the same thing. And then they are seeing this in real time of their subscribers just moving into this technology. So there's
Mhm.
an ecosystem play here. Starlink's not selling a single product. They're selling connectivity as a platform, right? And like I said, once you're in this context, they're halfway into your home. They're halfway into that second conversation.
Yep, absolutely. And it speaks to another potential real challenge here as it relates to, satellite internet. And, if Amazon can, or Blue Origin, I suppose, can stop exploding rockets on the launch pad,
Was such a cool video,
eventually
man.
it was an insane video. That was an insane video. Holy geez. Just watching that, especially from like hundreds of miles away where people saw it exploding in the night sky. Anyway, regardless, really glad nobody was hurt as part of that. So that's we'll take the win as that. But that was an
Mhm.
insane video. The that also is that similar ecosystem play. Amazon already has a foot in their door of 150 million homes in the U.S. with Amazon Prime. Very
That's the one
similar
that scares me
situation.
the most, Gabe.
Yeah, for sure, right? If I'm an internet service provider, and again, not trying to be all doomsday about this, but that is the one that would make me the most nervous for
Gabe, we
sure.
keep saying not to be most, not to be doomsday, but like we talked about this in the Amazon episode, but like there is a like there is a level of urgency behind this. We can't just sit
True.
and watch from the sidelines and hope another rocket blows up, or hope,
Yeah,
that they don't find their way into our subscribers' homes. Because I think with the Amazon case, again, we haven't seen the commercials on that yet, but this is an e-commerce giant. They are not going to mess this up.
for sure. And you're right. There is an urgency that needs to happen here. And I think there is a window, right? And I think that window is pretty rapidly collapsing where providers need to really deeply think again about the experience that they're delivering to customers and make some of these changes right now. Because if they don't, then it is going to be a doomsday situation. And we are going to see, providers lose significant percentages of their subscriber base to these other options. Again, Starlink just got a giant pile of cash. Amazon has basically a relationship with almost every single household in the United States already. So there is definitely some urgency in making these changes. And especially when I talk to somebody like you, who I know you have high expectations of technology. So when you tell me, wow, this situation has been pretty incredible. And also the touch points that they're thinking about throughout this journey have also been really positive. That tells me that there's definitely some challenges ahead if people don't get this right and get it right now.
Exactly. I don't like sitting around and waiting. So what better time to think of the 7 P's of marketing and how you're going to, compete with I don't want to say these technologies, but how are you going to compete with the technology and win with your experience. That's the message today. The last thing I want to say on Starlink though is just with Apple. No news yet with any potential partnerships with Starlink. Nothing was announced at WWDC, which of course is a software event, but their hardware event for iPhones always comes up in September, and I think we will potentially see something then. If not, like I said, they've already got their foot in the door with some popular apps with this Starlink satellite connection and low data integration. The hardware is really the next component here. So
Hmm.
I'm not thinking about switching my home internet to Starlink today. I mean, I know from a podcast perspective, Gabe, it would take me forever to upload these episodes once again,
We have very
and I
unique use cases, Zach.
and I don't want that experience of their app or their hardware in my home. I've got a very nice ecosystem right now that I'd like to retain, and of course, the same ecosystem is what I'm talking to my friends and neighbors about from
Hmm.
my service provider here. But Gabe, I think just to wrap this up here, it's not cool is not about technology, right? Apple's got the best integration story in tech, yet they're still struggling to get people to switch to these new AI tools.
Hmm.
SpaceX turned this financial filing into this giant event, and they raised the $80 billion you mentioned here in a single day here. So the lesson we're talking about today is not to go compete with Starlink on satellite, but think about what you're doing here alternatively. You're not winning on specs, you're winning on the narrative, the experience. You win when the buying process feels effortless, that checkout experience, the brand that everyone talks about as well. Like I said, no one's talking about Wild Blue, but you need to make a story that people want to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if, as we've talked about, many times before, Zach, if the website has, 15, 20 different service tiers and a complicated table of how to explain services, or a contact us form that doesn't actually lead anywhere instead of a way to actually buy on the website, then we're going to be losing to some of these other technology providers who are making all of this easy, and you're losing to what is better marketing effectively, and a better customer experience. So, we don't want to be a bummer, but we do want to be realistic about some of the risks that exist right now, and to encourage people to frankly think deeply about how they're going to differentiate and continue to differentiate as these new types of competitors come up and are perceived as cool technology.
Absolutely, Gabe. Fantastic episode as usual here.
Have we ever had a non-fantastic episode, Zach? I mean, I feel like you always say this at the end of
Just the
every
one that was
episode.
deleted, but we don't talk about that one.
The one that you lied to me about.
That one episode back in the
Uh,
day. But no, thank you everyone for tuning into Buffering. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and to share it with your friends and colleagues. And for more insights and updates, be sure to connect with Gabe and I on LinkedIn.